All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is Features Explained for Humans. I'm Will Long. I'm a Drupal developer from the Chicago area. Do a lot of consulting work. I specialize in back-end Drupal development. Do a lot of site architecture type stuff also. Today I'm going to talk to you about features, how to use them, what to do with them. How many people here are using features already? How many people like using features? How many people feel effective using features? Okay. All right. Well, hopefully we can gain some knowledge on how to deal with features, what features do for you, and just what it means to effectively use features. So I gave a presentation very similar to this 2 or 3 years ago at the user group for Fox Valley, and gave a whole presentation. We talked about features, what they do, how to work with them, all the great things that features will do for you. And towards the end of the session, a gentleman asked me a question, and basically his question was, why do I need it? What do I get out of using features? What's the big deal about using features? And I was a little disappointed that I hadn't really touched on that throughout the entire presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it explicitly clear that the reason why features are so important to us is because features are a tool that's going to let us take configuration from our Drupal site and save it into files. As a professional developer, that's very important to me because by having my configuration in the files, I can then commit it to my project's repository, and from there that configuration can be shared, it can be version controlled, and then it can also be deployed to production server, for instance. Drupal is very notorious for storing its configuration in the database. It's such a huge kind of pitfall of Drupal that Drupal 8 is shipping with the CMI initiative involved to get around using features. All right, so the things I hope we'll be able to take away from this session are I hope you'll be empowered enough to use features. For one, to understand the concepts of features, understand the different pieces that are in play with features and the terminology that's involved with features, as well understand how to actually manage features. So that's actually dealing with the features once it's built, as well as architecting features into a logical grouping. And then also acquire the ability to deploy changes to your website using features. And we're going to get there by first talking about how features works, and then we're going to go into the different various workflow and operations you'll use. Once again, the architecture, how you're going to package your features, the Contrib modules that are going to help us out along the way, and then we're going to close it out with tips and tricks on how to deal with your features. I noticed there was only one hand raised when we talked, or when I asked who likes using features. There's actually 2 hands raised because I like using features. Features has a really bad reputation, and I don't think it's totally deserved. I was actually there at one point. There's one of the first big Drupal projects I did was a distribution that was packaged using features, and I had no idea what the hell these things were. They're just these modules. Just start going in and changing things, this and that. Long story short, caused a bunch of drama, a bunch of trouble. I didn't know what I was doing, and I hated features. After working with features for a little while, under the guise of needing to get a sane development workflow and configuration management in place, I came around to love features. So I hope by the end of the session we'll have more than 2 hands raised in here. We're going to do that by making it as simple as we can. And this is essentially the session that I wish someone would have given me when I was first starting out with features. So we'll start with the actual features module. The features module does 3 basic things for us. First off, it has the ability to analyze the configuration of your website. The second thing it's going to do is it has the ability to take the configuration from your website and write it into files. And then the third thing it has the ability to do is to take configuration from those files and apply that to your Drupal site. So that's it. Not that scary, is it? So the second part of this equation are features integrated modules. Features integrated modules provides component types and components to features. So if you can see on the slide, the component types are the logical groupings in the right-hand column. So in this case, we're looking at, there's a couple panes that are open here. We've got our content types, those nodes, and then we've got field bases and field instances. So each of those sets is a type of component, and each thing listed in that set is an actual component. So this happens by a features integrated module declaring to features that it has component types, and then also enumerating each type of component that's available. Yes? I am not sure if I can do that on this dual. Is that better?
Way better.
You can hit the lights over there.
So once again, each group is a component type, and it's composed of individual components inside of it. So to integrate with features, any module that provides things that we're interested in being featureized, it would incorporate some hooks to provide this information to features. Are there any developers in here? Do you develop things that you want to capture in features? Oh, well. Well, this is how you do it. There's several critical hooks involved for exposing your things to features. So your things being a type of component, and then the actual components themselves, along with providing code that features will actually use when it writes out your components. Yes?
We found when we're using, if we use Strongarm, and maybe our custom modules just have a simple admin settings page, we can use even Strongarm to just featureize those settings.
Sure. We're actually going to cover Strongarm later, but that is a good way to deal with simple type configuration. So we're not going to dig into all this, but by all means, if you're a developer and you have things that you want to be able to incorporate in your features, check out the API file that's included with the features module. It's got a lot of information. There's actually a lot of additional hooks, but these are the basics. So we've got features, and we've got features integrated modules that provide things to features. The resulting bit of this are the actual feature modules. So the feature modules are what features produces. It's a module just like any other module. It just happens to be written by features, and it's got a couple of specifics. We'll just go ahead and take a look at those real quick. The .info file for this feature module has a couple bits in it. One, telling features to be aware of it, and two, it enumerates each component that's going to be in the feature. We've got a module file as well. The module file that features produces is essentially blank. It's going to include another file. Sometimes developers will actually put code in this file. I prefer not to, but it actually is possible, and it's fine. And then that file that gets included is this .include file. So by default, components will actually go into this file. There's a few things you'll see in here. There's an API file. Let me get that zoomed in for you. So a lot of modules will need an API hook to declare to whatever module that's using it that it exists. Those will go in here, and also some of the actual components will go in here. And then what you'll also see a lot is specific component types will put their stuff in their own include file. So this is an example of an include file for field bases. It's just a file named for that specific component type. It implements this default hook, which actually contains the configuration, and then features will pick that up automatically as needed. So just to recap, we've got the features module itself. This is the contributed project on Drupal.org. It's currently at version 7.x-2.6 that came out earlier this week. There's the features integrated modules, and the features module itself is actually a features integrated module as it provides features integration for a lot of core stuff. And then the features integrated modules declare components and component types, and then we have the actual resulting feature modules that will go onto your website. All right, so is everybody with us so far? Features integration, component types, components, features. All right, so when we actually go ahead and work with features, there's a couple things we need to be aware of regarding components. First of all, there are several different types of components. The most natural type of component is what's called an exportable component. I'll explain why it's more natural a little bit later on, but these are things like views and panels and contexts, things like that have what's called a default hook. We saw default hooks in that code we were just looking at a minute ago. So a default hook is something that lives in the file. When Drupal goes to load that component, it will check the file first. After that, it'll check the database to see if there's an overridden copy in the database, and then Drupal will use whichever one it found. So we've got exportables, and we also have what's known as Faux-Exportables. Faux-Exportables are kind of almost like a backward port to make certain things work with features. So these are things that when Drupal loads it, it does not load it from the code. It does not have a default hook that you can load the component from, but instead it loads it directly from the database. And in this case, features itself will actually implement the default hook and manage dealing with the actual configuration later on. All right, so if we're working with features, who recognizes these states? Who knows what they mean? Okay, there's really only two very common and critical ones. There's default and overridden. We'll see that in just a second. Needs review means we're not sure, so a human should look at it. It should probably just be reverted. Rebuilding is actually something to do with the Faux-Exportable. Actually jump back there real quick. Rebuilding is actually the process of moving something from the code back into the database. And then we've got a conflict, which just means two components are in separate features. So the problem with that is if you have a component declared twice and it has two different configurations, how do we know what to do? All right, so overridden. So we're going to talk about what overridden means. All it means is the configuration of Drupal does not match what's in the default hook, so what's in our configuration files. There's two things you're going to be able to do here. There's several scenarios that might actually wind up with you getting here. One is you've made changes locally, or two is you've pulled in changes to your configuration file. So let's talk about if we make changes locally. What we're going to want to do to capture that change is we're going to want to update our feature. So Drupal's got the new configuration. That new configuration is stored in our database. This is the same for regular exportables as well as Faux-Exportables. When we update the feature, we're just taking that configuration, getting rid of the old stuff, and putting the new stuff in our feature. At that point, we can then commit that change and push it, or whatever we need to do with it from there. But that it is, at that point, a part of the history of our project. We've also got a feature revert. So this is the opposite. This is saying, I don't want the configuration I have locally, so we're going to use the configuration that's in our feature and apply that to our site. So what you're seeing here is actually that rebuild process I was talking about. So this is a Faux-Exportable, where we've got configuration in our feature that we want to apply to our website. What features is actually going to do is what's called a rebuild, and it's actually going to take the existing configuration out of the website and replace it with what's in our feature file. And here's what happens with a feature revert happening on an actual true exportable. So when you revert an exportable, we're not dealing with the database at all. We're just getting rid of the overridden copy that's there, and Drupal will then load it directly from the file. This is ideal. This is what I was talking about earlier, why the exportable features are more natural and more ideal for use. It's because when you do a revert, it's actually going to clear it out of the database. If the files change underneath it, all you have to do is clear the cache, and your new configuration is applied to your website. For instance, if you deploy a change to your website, that means new files are in place. You clear the cache to your website, the configuration is already changed. The alternative to that, once again, is the Faux-Exportable, where if you push this change live, you actually have to go in and revert the feature. All right, architecting features. Who here is an architect? Exactly. So this is really one of the more, I'm going to say non-scientific, there's no real right or wrong way to do this. Most people just find themselves in varying states of wrongness. And what that means is they start building things and they start going down one path and it just doesn't really work out, or it kind of gets muddled along the way, or they bring in the junior developer and then things just kind of happen. So when we architect our feature, there's kind of two main philosophies we can use. It's really the preference of the builder, whoever's in charge of, at the time, deciding what components go into which features. So once again, maybe I haven't made this clear, but when we talk about architecting features, we're talking about building a suite of feature modules that contain the configuration from our site, and we want to architect them into logically organized groupings. So the first kind of grouping you would do is a function-based architecture. For instance, this is an image gallery. Say we wanted to add an image gallery functionality to our website. You'd build a feature that looks something like this. So we'd include the image content type along with the fields it uses. There's probably some user permissions in play for who can use that content type. If we're going to use it, we'll probably end up using a view with a slideshow on top of it. So we would have dependencies to the things that we need, and then we'd also have the actual view that displays this included in our feature. This is actually the philosophy that I started with, and to me, it's really hard to maintain and manage this type of philosophy. From what I understand, this is what's preferred on large teams or teams of multiple developers, to keep the developers out of the same pieces of configuration at the same time. I actually do work on teams with several developers, and I still don't prefer to do it this way. But once again, there's no right or wrong way. It's up to whoever's in charge when it comes time to decide how to do it. All right, the second type of architecture, this is the one that I champion. This is the component-based architecture. So this is essentially putting all the similar things together. So you're going to lump all your field bases into one feature, put all your kind of general site configuration. You might have something with your media that contains your image styles, any media type configuration. You get your SEO with your meta tags, your path auto, all that type of stuff. A separate feature for each content type. Stuff dealing with your taxonomy, so all your vocabularies, any fields on those vocabularies will go in there. User configuration, panels, views, any type of those things that you can kind of segment off on their own. It's going to make it easier to manage. It's going to make it easier to figure out where things go. So if you add a new view to your site, where does it go? It goes into the views feature. If you make an adjustment to a panels configuration on your site, the panels feature better be the feature that gets updated. You better not see changes to the media configuration, for instance. There's also, if you visit my website, very, very out of date, but there is a post on there with a little more detail about how I prefer to configure my features. All right, so features in itself is great, but there's actually a lot of very useful Contrib tools to go along with features that are going to help you deal with features, help you manage your features, help you figure out what's going on. So we're going to cover Strongarm and Diff in just a moment, but we've got UUID features, which integrates UUID and features. And what that means is UUID gives us the ability to assign random identifiers onto different things, individual nodes, for instance, blocks, I believe menu items, a few other things like that. When we integrate that with features, we can actually take those things and put them in our features. For instance, we could take a node that has a UUID, package that node into our feature, and when we deploy that, that node will be recreated or be updated or whatever the circumstance is when this change deploys. There's also Features Extra, which provides some additional features integration. So it's more components, more component types that are available to select from in your list of features. If you don't have the things that you want listed in your component types, you can check out the Contrib space to see if there's already some type of integration that's out there, or you can use some custom development of those hooks that we looked at earlier to provide your own components to features. And there's also Features Override. This is a newer module. It was actually produced by Mike Potter in Phase 2, who do, well, Mike Potter is the features guy. And this is particularly useful when dealing with websites that were built using distributions or websites that use features that are shared amongst other websites. And what that'll do is allow you to selectively override pieces of your feature. So the initial feature will contain whatever component, and then the features override provides a new component type, which is the actual override. So if we've got a content type, it's called basic page, we just want to call it page, we can introduce an override that will rename it to just page. So features will load all the data through whatever hooks it loads the data through, and it's going to, the result of all that is it's going to expect the page content type to be called page and not basic page. And then we'll also come back to Features Builder in a moment. So Strongarm, this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Drupal stores a lot of little bits of data in its internal variable system. What this actually is a table in the database that just stores simple name pair or name value pair type data. Strongarm gives you access to that. It provides features integration for these variables and allows you to capture the data from those into your features. This is almost a must-have to work with features. There's so much configuration gets saved into those Strongarm variables that you pretty much have to use this. You can see that this is a feature built supporting a page content type, and you can see there are 3 Strongarm values at the bottom. So there's some comment configuration, and there's also some node, like the publishing options and the submitted byline options. Those are all stored in variables. And if we built this feature without those, we wouldn't have access to those. We wouldn't be able to make changes to that configuration and then deploy. All right, another very important module for working with features is the Diff module. I think a lot of people are familiar with the Diff module in terms of comparing revisions of content. So you make a new revision of a node, you then have your revisions tab available, and it'll show you a diff between the old revision and the new revision, so you can see what content changed. This also provides some integration with features. And what it actually is this additional tab that you see on the feature page, and it will actually show you a diff of what's changed between your actual configuration and what's in the code. We're zoomed in a little too far to see. But you can see on the left-hand side over here, we have the default configuration. That's what our feature is expecting to see. And then we've got our override, which is the actual configuration. And this is a very useful way to analyze what's overridden on your website. So you'll be able to look at a page like this, see which changes are there, and decide which change you want to keep. From there, you can either update your feature with a new configuration, or you can revert it back to the configuration the features is expecting. All right, and then here we go with the Features Builder. Full disclosure, this is actually something that I wrote, so use it at your own discretion. Technically, there's not a release yet, but I would not consider it experimental. I would consider it stable, and it's actually running on a handful of production websites right now. It's actually running on the current mid-camp site, so the 2015 mid-camp site was built using Features Builder. And what this is, it's kind of a two-part thing. One is it's a system that allows you to programmatically determine what goes into which feature. And then it's also a system of builders that actually do that determination. So it comes with two pieces. So there's the actual builders with the logic to determine what goes where, and then there's the piece that actually uses that logic to actually build features for you. And then the builders themselves, you can swap them out with custom builders if you want to change the way it works. So this is somewhat inspired by the CMI that you see in Drupal 8. And so what it'll do is you just build your features. It's a one operation. It'll rebuild all your features. It'll look for the things it's looking for on your site, and it'll build it all out. And from there, you can commit whatever changes you need to make. All right, on to the tips and tricks for using features. Everybody here using Drush? Yeah, use it. Use it a lot. Use it for everything, not just features, but particularly feature-centric stuff. There are a few key commands here. There's the Drush FL will provide you a nice listing of all your features and tell you which ones are default, overridden, whatever the case may be. There's the Drush FDiff, which will provide you a diff similar to what the diff module showed you. It'll show you actually pieces of your feature that are overridden, what the default value is and what the overridden value is. Then we've got the Drush FU, which is the update of the feature. That's Mark's favorite.
It is the most satisfying thing to type every single time.
And then so that's Drush FU. There's also a Drush FUA for all. We've also got the opposite of that, which is the FR, which is the revert function. So once again, the update is to take your configuration that's in your website, write it into your features. We've got the feature revert, which is taking the configuration that's in your feature and applying it to your website. And then the last command is actually one that I use when I deploy websites. It will revert all of your features, and it will do it forcefully. I have a wonderful graphic for this. So if we don't revert forcefully, if there's something in the database, it could potentially remain in the database. So particularly with this exportable type feature. So when you revert an exportable, what's in the database only gets cleared out of the database if it doesn't, if it's overridden. So if it matches what's in the feature, it stays there. And then what could potentially happen is the code could change underneath. Then you've got an overridden copy still in the database. So if you do a forceful revert, it will actually clear all of the exportables out of the database. So this Drush FRA force, this is the way to totally clear out all of your exportables.
Can you do that on just a single one, just an FR and an FRA?
You can, but particularly when you're deploying a site, you just want them all to match what's in the code. So that the code is the actual source of your configuration. That's what somebody has updated and committed to code. That should be what's intended to be your configuration.
We did some client sites that for some reason have a lot of overridden but I don't want to go.
Remind me to come back to that. I don't have a slide specific to that, but. All right, so dependency handling. One of the big knock against features is the way dependencies get handled sometimes. So you get in a strange scenario where one feature is dependent upon another feature, which may be dependent on 3 or 4 more other features, and it's just not a logical chain. So dependencies are good. Don't avoid dependencies. Let your natural dependencies occur, but avoid dependencies that just don't make sense. So an example of a natural dependency is if we've got our field bases in one feature, and then we've got a content type with the body field, it should depend on the field base feature, right? So I mean, it needs the field base from that other feature. What's a kind of an arbitrary dependency is our page content type depending on our image content type because it has the field. So by setting it's basically the way you get around this is to be diligent when you build your features. One of the big trip-ups I notice myself making all the time is if I package taxonomy terms or a taxonomy type field onto a node, it will add a dependency. It will actually add the vocabulary that field uses in with the content type. So the way to get around that is you would package your taxonomy vocabulary in the taxonomy feature and then build your node feature that depends on the taxonomy. All right. One of the other things I like to do is make small, sensible commits. So this is actually going to involve analyzing the changes that you see in the actual feature files as you make your commits. You should probably actually be using git add-p all the time, whether it's features related or not. And what this will do is as you make the commit, it will go through each change, so chunk by chunk, and ask you if you want to stage that in your commit. So if you've got 10 changes that have occurred, but you only want a certain 3 of them, you can stage just those 3 and make a commit with just those 3. So this also applies to features. So you'll be able to make updates to whatever feature modules that you want, add them with the git add-p, and it'll go through each change that was made and ask you if you want that to be included. All right. And that is actually all I've got. Are there any particular questions? Anybody have any good features, stories, questions? Mark.
Is there a good way to burn features plus panels in Fire? Like, that's where I've had the most trouble, is particularly like when you've got panels and features on a production site that's running, right? Then you're doing like a redo with panels on your development site, like, right? And changes keep getting made on the production site, and then you're trying to bring them down, and then like panels in particular, like it just seems like there's like a nightmarish slew of like diffs and stuff like that, where it's tiny little things like ID updated and stuff, and you get all kinds of merge conflicts and stuff.
So, I mean, in general, you always want to avoid merge conflicts when possible.
Right.
So staging just smaller commits will help with some of that. The scenario of configuration being updated on production, it's obviously not ideal.
Not that they're updating it purely on production, they've got a separate staging environment for that. But like, there's a live like site, but you're doing a redo of that site, right? So that each your own development staging stacks for those. So like integrating a live production site with like the site, new version of the site they're redoing. Does that make sense?
It does. So when you take their changes, how are you doing that? So they've got their instance of the site that they are making adjustments to? Like what does that? How do you actually incorporate those changes?
Merging that branch for the production site into the development branch is then when that happens. So And I think like what we found most helpful is merging more often rather than merging, for master entry redesign.
Sure.
You let it go a long time, it gets really hairy.
It does. So I mean, that's a problem that you'll see with code in general, not specific to features, but if you have a backlog of let's call them pull requests to merge, the likelihood of them not happening cleanly increases drastically as the backlog gets bigger. That instance that you're describing is kind of familiar. If anything, I would say, like, if you're literally doing a redesign, I would almost say make new panels. So
That's where we had the most problems when you're reusing some of the similar
Right.
features and stuff like that.
So I mean, a lot of that stuff you have the ability to clone it. You can, and that might be the best way to handle that. In general, as long as changes are made small and decisively, merge conflicts are reduced.
Right, yeah. Thanks.
Anybody else? Yes.
I played around with features a little bit and I really looked things up. Obviously, I didn't know what I was doing, so that's why I'm here. So if I'm in site A and I create a bunch of image styles, I can use features then to package that up and bring it over to site B.
You could, yes. So I believe image styles are exportable, and you're able to actually do that without features. So a feature just for image styles is it just seems a little bit overkill. But at the same time, you should probably just be using features for all of the configuration of the site. So I mean, if you just somehow got those into your site, features would then be able to pick them up and manage them for you.
So it would allow you to bring over the whole package of image styles instead of doing just one at a time.
Right. And so once again, features are just regular modules that run on your site. You have the ability to go in and edit the module. So it just happens to be written by features. It's kind of curated by features. But if you would like to make changes to it, you can always do that. So even if you exported them, like generated a feature from the first site, you could go use that same code and just go in and integrate them into a feature on sites. So from site A to site B, so you could integrate them onto site B. Yes.
I think that really helped us was when we had multiple people working on the same site. If we had one person who kept features up to date. So if we waited till the end to try to do features, it was a pain and people were just complaining. When we curated them constantly, even with the live site, calling back from live, checking the differences, recreating as necessary.
Sure. So one kind of workflow operation that I notice myself using a lot, particularly on live sites, they have features that get overridden. This was something you mentioned earlier, but point in case is a site that uses panels heavily. It uses the custom ctools content panes. I mean, those are meant to be updated, but they're also in a feature. There's a bit of a strange paradigm with that. But the point being, though, is periodically it is a good idea to take your feature site or your production site and just update the features on it. So I mean, that's whatever is on there is what's running on production, and hopefully that's what that's what the configuration should be. So I mean, if that's not what the configuration should be, it's kind of too late. So I mean, it can always go back and be fixed, but that the configuration is what it is. So the operation would be to then take whatever the live configuration is and commit that onto your production branch, and then from then any other changes would just get merged into that.
It actually was really helpful for us. So we'll call in from the live site and the database down at Diff. And then we'll use features Diff to see what's been changed. And it can even help us point out someone that's doing things the wrong way, right? Changing a view in production when they should really be going through the dev.
Right.
So yeah, that's...
The scenario that you're describing seems to me when configuration perhaps more naturally changes by an administrator. we've seen also when you try to feature things where maybe some configuration was added by a module that isn't fully featurable, it can show as overridden immediately because it's just not supported fully by features. Have you experienced that too?
I don't know that I've experienced that exactly. One thing kind of similar to that is if you update a module that provides components, sometimes it will actually change the way that it exports the component, so either the structure of the export or something in there. So at that point, if features analyzes what's in the code versus what the actual configuration is, so the code will have the old type of export versus the current configuration in the new format, they won't match. So a lot of times when you update Contrib modules that provide these featureizable components, updating your features will also be a part of that process.
We've seen it happen immediately though. So you create a feature, then you migrate it to your dev site or something, or up to a stage site, and it will immediately show overridden, even though it's never been installed before. So theoretically, it should be creating a clean.
Will it revert?
It's kind of like it's not, I don't think it's a problem with features, it's a way some modules have implemented features hooks. And so they don't really do things correctly, and sometimes not all the settings are saved correctly in the database, so it always thinks it's out of date.
That's right. That's a better way. It always thinks so. I don't know why that's happening to us a lot.
I found that happens sometimes with menus as well. When you featureize a menu item that's tied to a specific node ID, and then features that node doesn't exist. And then
Right. Yeah, menu items typically aren't something that I featureize, particularly for that reason. A lot of times I'll handle those with like a migration or a one-time import or something similar to that. But
how do you?
like either with a true migration, so some type of source file that migrates and handles updates and purging old stuff, or just a one-time import. I mean, if you're trying to do kind of an automated install where you can have like an install profile that turns on all its features and gets your config back in state, and then imports whatever content and or menu items and different things like that, taxonomy terms, similar things like that.
One other thing that I found really helpful with Drush features is Drush FC and Drush FE.
FE.
So, like, I've been doing this a lot with images for image styles and responsive image styles and stuff like that. That I'll do Drush FC and I'll list all the components. Like if you're on the command line, like updating a feature or and you added something new, like an image style. Like I do Drush FC and it lists all the different components there. And I pick the one that I want, like image, and then it lists which things there are and which feature they belong to. And I'll do then Drush FE, and then the component that I want, the feature that I want the item to go into, and then the list of all the features, like all the image styles. And then once I do that, then it'll update the feature. I can do a get diff and make sure it all looks right, and then I commit that. That's
Yeah. So since Features 2 came out, I find myself almost never doing that for some reason.
So, how do you?
Just through the UI. Just through the.
Okay.
I just go into the feature that I want to put it into. So I believe features one. I forget the exact pain point I was having with it, but it was slow and tedious and not.
Does the
pleasant.
UI do a better job of like finding all the dependencies for things? 'Cause that's
They should do the same.
because what I find is like when I do the Drush FC and then like manually exporting it, like I have to track down and like export each of the different component types, and like it's hard. Like sometimes there's like 6 or 7 different component types to track down for something.
Well, what I would expect to be able to happen with that is if you, I would initially expect Drush FE to grab the components you're trying to grab and its dependencies, or other features that contain its dependency as dependencies. And if that doesn't work, you could just do just the component that you're interested in, and then you could go back and do a Drush feature update on that specific feature. Or if you're still not getting the behavior and you think that the UI is doing it better, you could just go into the UI and regenerate the feature. You could, those are alternative routes that should be doing the same thing, but
Okay.
if you suspect it's doing different things, you could try that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Anything else? All right, thanks. Take care.